I have learned that sometimes God allows us to go through certain experiences in order to teach us particular lessons. I call this learning experiences. Many years ago, I was returning to the States from an overseas missions trip in Colombia. We landed in the midst of very, very turbulent weather at the airport in Miami, Florida. And I was to change planes there in Miami. I expected it to take probably 45 minutes to an hour before I got on my flight to go home. But the weather became steadily worse as the minutes passed. We were actually there probably an hour or even a little bit more, maybe an hour and a half. And finally, they announced that it was time to board the plane. We all got on the plane, we were seated, and I noticed that the weather was still very difficult, turbulent weather. The clouds were heavy. It was so dark, although it was daytime, it was dark, and I could hardly see things around the plane. But we taxied out to the end of the runway, and when we got there, the pilot turned the plane around and stopped the engine. It was a difficult thing to be in this particular situation. He came on the intercom and he said, we are waiting here at the end of the runway for a narrow window of opportunity to get airborne. And he said, be patient while we wait. I looked at my watch about the time he said that, and 1 hour and 18 minutes later, after sitting there at the end of the runway, he announced that we were about to become airborne. Started the plane, and we started down the runway, and as we were the plane was being lifted into the air, the weather was still very difficult and very, very turbulent. And I wondered about the wisdom of flying in this kind of weather. But then my consolation was these folks know a whole lot more about flying than I do. So I just sat back to kind of negotiate my way through all of the turbulence. But it seemed like an eternity. It could not have been long. I don't think the plane could have lasted for a long time. The weather was so very difficult. And we were under the clouds. And then we emerged from under the clouds to the midst of the cloud. And when we got into the clouds, I have never been in a plane when it was as difficult as it was. Some of the bins overhead where some of the luggage was being stored fell open, and people all over the plane were praying. They were not praying quietly. They were praying loudly. Some of the lady folks were weeping and screaming. It was a challenging thing. And it just seemed like it went on forever. But finally, we climbed through that cloud, and we were above the cloud. And it was perfectly calm. It was a smooth flight. I looked out the window at those white clouds that were beneath the plane, and it was a beautiful sight, and it was absolutely amazing. My question was, how could life be so difficult in things that were so beautiful beneath me? And it was while we were flying above the clouds that I felt like God spoke to my heart and told me that there are 3 levels where people spend their life. There are people who absolutely spend all of their life living under the cloud. They live with worry. They live with dread. They live with questions in their mind. They're always looking at the dark side because they're under the cloud. I remember one time meeting up with a friend of mine that I hadn't seen in quite a while. And I said, well, how are you doing? And very slowly he paused and he said, well, Brother Young, under the circumstance. And then he paused. And before he could say another word, I said, I want to ask you this. What are you doing under the clouds? What are you doing under the circumstance? You're supposed to be above the circumstance. But, there are some people who somehow have chosen to live their life under the cloud. But then there are other people that live their life in the cloud. They go from one turbulent experience to another. They go from one battle to another. They struggle because they're in the midst of the clouds. They never have victory. They're gloomy. They're sorrowful. They feel pain. They feel hurt. They live all of their life in the cloud. Now, I want you to understand today that it is not God's purpose for you to live under the cloud, and it's not his purpose for you to live in the cloud. There's a better place for you to live, and that better place is above the cloud, where the sun never sets, where everything is bright and wonderful. Now, I'm not saying you won't have to go through the valley. You may have to go through the valley, but remember this, if you have the faith of God and you are under divine direction, God will be with you and God will stand with you. So allow the Holy Ghost to take you above the clouds, above all of your difficulties. Don't spend your time feeding your doubts, but feed your faith. Take your vision off of your doubts and off of your difficulty and look into the heart of God. Look into the eyes of God and let faith raise you a little bit higher. You say, but Brother Young, how can I get above the cloud? The Bible tells us to set our affections on things above, where moth and rust cannot corrupt and where thieves cannot break through and steal. Allow God to move you to a place where you are at a higher level and let God be your victory. God bless you is my prayer.